$500 million gamble. The secret mission to snatch photos from orbit, mid-air recovery. The silence was the loudest, most terrifying sound any generation of Americans had ever known. It was the silence of the enemy, a black, starless void across which the Soviet Union sent forth their ominous challenge. We stood at the precipice of a new, terrifying age, where the fate of our great nation, and indeed the entire world, hung on a few pieces of metal hurtling through the stratosphere. Every headline screamed of a missile gap, a chasm of vulnerability widening beneath our feet, suggesting the Soviets held an overwhelming, decisive nuclear advantage. The collective breath we held was cold, sharp with paranoia. We knew how to fight, but against an unseen inventory of weapons, how could we even begin to defend ourselves? We needed truth. A raw, undeniable fact to pierce the suffocating fog of fear, or we risked making a fatal move driven solely by catastrophic guesswork. Our survival hinged on seeing what could not be seen, and our best engineers were given an impossible task: to turn the darkness of space into a mirror reflecting the truth. In the late 1950s, the Cold War wasn't just a political struggle. It was an existential dread woven into the fabric of American life. We built bomb shelters in our backyards and practiced duck and cover drills in our schools, all while staring up at a sky that felt increasingly hostile. But the real threat wasn't just the bomb. It was the paralysis of uncertainty. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a veteran of global war, and a man who understood the crushing weight of strategic miscalculation, faced the impossible. Our best intelligence was fractured, often unreliable, and always filtered through the thick fog of Soviet secrecy. Reports, often fueled by fear and political posturing, suggest the U.S. lagged dangerously behind in intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs. We were told we faced a terrifying missile gap. The implications of this presumed gap were catastrophic. If the gap was real, we had to initiate a frantic, all-consuming military buildup, potentially bankrupting our nation, and, worse, provoking the very war we sought to avoid. If it was a lie, a propaganda ploy, we risked a massive, unnecessary overreaction that could trigger the Soviet Union to ramp up their own production, turning a myth into a terrifying reality. Eisenhower knew that the cost of acting on a lie was the death of millions. He refused to allow our nation's destiny to be dictated by speculation or fear. We needed eyes in the sky. We needed an absolute, unimpeachable witness to the truth hidden behind the Iron Curtain. We had achieved miracles before: the Transcontinental Railroad, the Panama Canal, victory in 2 world wars. But this was different. This wasn't about engineering terrain. This was about conquering the very heavens to retrieve a single, definitive piece of evidence. The decision was made, shrouded in the deepest secrecy imaginable. Eisenhower authorized a program that was not just ambitious, but bordered on science fiction: America's first orbiting reconnaissance system. It would be our nation's desperate, collective gamble for peace. To hide its true world-saving purpose, the project was given the benign cover name Discoverer. The actual program, the one that would forge our hope into hardware, was codenamed Corona. Corona wasn't born in the gleaming, public spotlight of Cape Canaveral. It was conceived in the shadowlands of innovation, in clandestine labs, remote testing facilities, and the guarded conference rooms of the White House and the CIA. The engineers, scientists, and analysts who labored on Corona were the silent heroes of our age. They were fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, who went to work every day telling their families they were building weather sensors or navigation systems, when in reality, they were building a fragile mechanism to hold back global catastrophe. The task facing these men and women, our scientists, our artisans of truth, was staggeringly complex. First, the camera system. It had to be light enough to lift into orbit, robust enough to survive the brutal journey, and capable of photographing missile sites and air bases from hundreds of miles up with unprecedented resolution. We didn't need fuzzy shapes, we needed detail, clarity, the ability to count rivets and rockets. Second, the film itself. The camera would use miles of specialized film, but how could we possibly get it back? Unlike digital systems of the future, there was no downloading data. The physical film canister had to be ejected from the satellite, survive the scorching try into the atmosphere, and then be recovered intact. A tiny, falling needle in the vast, tempestuous haystack of the Pacific Ocean. This was the true crucible of American ingenuity, the development of the re-entry vehicle. We had to design a heat shield that would keep the film cool enough not to combust, We had to create a mechanism that would deploy a parachute at exactly the right moment. And we had to choreograph a retrieval operation where a specially outfitted C-119 cargo plane, flying at high altitude, would hook the parachute mid-air using a trapeze-like rig. If the plane missed, the canister was designed to sink upon impact with the sea, taking the world's most critical secrets to the bottom of the ocean forever. The pressure on the Corona team was immense, a silent weight heavier than any war machine. They were not just solving engineering problems, they were solving a collective crisis of faith. The path to success was paved with excruciating, disheartening failures. We often forget the cost of pioneering, the sheer magnitude of trial and error that precedes triumph. The early tests of the Discoverer program were a brutal education in the unforgiving laws of orbital mechanics and rocketry. Discoverer 1, February 1959. We launched the first prototype. The world watched a weather satellite go up. We, the insiders, watched our hopes ascend. It reached orbit, but ground control lost contact. The capsule was never recovered. Failure. Discoverer 2, April 1959. Breakthrough. The capsule was successfully separated. But a timer malfunction led to the capsule descending over Norway Instay, D of the planned Mid-Pacific Recovery Zone. When recovery teams reached the impact area, the canister was gone. Stolen, perhaps, or simply lost to the wilderness. The world held its breath. Failure. Discoverer 3 through 12, 1959-1960. A relentless barrage of technical malfunctions. Rocket stage separations failed. Attitude control systems sputtered. Canisters tumbled into the atmosphere too early or too late. The mid-air recovery attempts were exercises in frustration, with planes chasing shadows. 11 launches, 11 failures in terms of usable intelligence. The world saw only the public news of Discoverer satellites failing in their benign reported meteorological missions. But behind the reinforced doors, the pressure was boiling. Congress was questioning the staggering cost. Skeptics within the military argued the technology was too complex, that we should stick to U-2 spy planes. The missile gap fear grew louder with every failed launch. Yet, our engineers and scientists never flinched. They tore down the complex systems, found the flaws, redesigned the valves, recalibrated the timers, and strengthened the heat shields. Our national character, the stubborn refusal to surrender an inch of ground, was on full display in those dark Wendell S-labs. We absorbed the defeats and treated each one not as an ending but as a mandatory, painful lesson in the brutal physics of space. We knew our purpose was too great, the stakes too high, to give in to despair. We were fighting a war against the unknown, and we would not lay down our tools. August 10th, 1960. This was the date engraved in our collective memory, the day our patience and resilience finally paid off. After a harrowing string of technical and operational nightmares, we lined up the next attempt, Discoverer 13. This launch wasn't just about getting a piece of hardware into orbit. It was about proving that the audacious goal, retrieving an object from space, was possible at all. For this test, the capsule contained no film, only an American flag and scientific instruments. It was a dry run, but one with the weight of the entire Cold War upon it. The Thoragina rocket roared to life, a beautiful, violent assertion of our will. The ascent was flawless. It reached orbit. Foe. 3 tense days, the satellite circled the globe, a metallic hummingbird flying at impossible speeds. Then came the moment of truth. From 500 miles above the Pacific, the command was sent. The camera capsule separated. The retro rockets fired, slamming the tiny vehicle into the dense upper atmosphere. The heat shield glowed incandescently, enduring temperatures that would melt steel. On the ground, recovery ships and aircraft formed a wide net. We watched, glued to the radio reports, our hearts pounding against the drumbeat of history. High above the sea, a bright orange parachute finally deployed, a vibrant, glorious signal against the deep blue. The recovery plane, however, missed. But this time it didn't matter. The capsule, resilient and buoyant, splashed down safely. A helicopter swooped in, a diver secured the line, and the capsule was hauled onto the deck of the USS Haikal. Triumph! We hadn't just put an object into space, we had, for the first time in human history, successfully retrieved a manufactured object from Earth orbit. Our scientists and engineers had done it. We had bridged the gap between the stars and the sea. The American flag inside was presented to President Eisenhower, a tangible symbol of our technological dominance and enduring resolve. The next step was immediate: the real mission. Just 5 days later, the real spy took flight. Discoverer 14. This satellite was armed with a revolutionary panoramic camera, loaded with miles of high-resolution film, and aimed directly at the heart of the Soviet military-industrial complex. The launch was perfect. The orbit was stable. The camera shutters clicked with silent, scientific precision as the satellite flew over missile bases, airfields, and strategic installations deep within the closed world of the USSR. Every revolution was an act of courage and collective defiance against the darkness of the unknown. Then, the final, terrifying chapter: retrieval. On August 19, 1960, the re-entry capsule fired its rockets and plunged back toward Earth. This time, the stakes were everything. This wasn't a dry run, it was the entire purpose of the Corona program. The C-119 recovery plane, piloted by Captain Harold Johnson, soared through the morning skies southwest of Hawaii. Below him, the vast expanse of the ocean waited to swallow the prize. Then, a flicker, a bright orange shape, the 36-foot recovery chute, blossoming far above. Johnson banked the C-119, lining up the grappling hook. The margin for error was non-existent. In a maneuver that still defies belief, Captain Johnson and his crew executed the catch. The hook snagged the parachute lines cleanly. The crew reeled in the precious cargo, the capsule containing the world. First genuine, objective view of the Soviet strategic capability. The moment that capsule touched the deck of the recovery aircraft, the Cold War entered a new, definitive phase. We had won the battle for information. The canister was rushed back to the Eastman Kodak processing facility in Rochester, New York, a place where another group of silent, dedicated Americans performed the sacred rite of developing the first ever high-resolution photographs taken from space. The film, a staggering 3,000 feet of it, revealed its secret slowly, frame by magnificent frame. Analysts pored over the imagery, their hearts perhaps the only things making any noise in the otherwise silent room. Every photograph was a priceless artifact, a glimpse behind the shroud of Soviet propaganda. The results were electrifying. The overwhelming conclusion, delivered in a top-secret briefing to President Eisenhower, was simple, elegant, and world-changing. There was no missile gap. The fearful estimates of hundreds of Soviet ICBMs were a fantasy. The Corona images revealed, with unimpeachable clarity, that the Soviets had deployed only a handful of operational ICBMs, perhaps 4 or fewer. Their bomber fleet was far smaller and less active than feared. The supposed colossal threat was, in reality, a fraction of the hysteria it had become. This quiet, factual revelation had the power of 1,000 armies. We averted an arms race catastrophe. Knowing the truth, Eisenhower did not have to authorize the massive, immediate, and ultimately provocative military buildup that fear demanded. We avoided escalating the nuclear production to dizzying, terrifying new heights. We ensured peace through certainty. For the first time, our strategic policy was grounded in verifiable fact, not propaganda. This certainty gave our leaders the confidence to negotiate, to be firm, and, most crucially, to be patient, rather than lashing out in a panic of perceived inferiority. The Corona program, our secret satellite, became the silent guardian of woe. RLD stability. It was the intelligence that allowed leaders to pursue détente, to breathe, and to think rationally. It was the moment our collective resolve, channeled through our best and brightest, pulled us back from the edge of annihilation. The Corona program ran for 12 years through 145 launches, recovering over 800,000 images, a treasure trove of intelligence that remains one of the most significant achievements in the history of espionage and engineering. It paved the way for every satellite we now rely on for weather, navigation, and communication. But its greatest victory wasn't technological. It was moral. This achievement reminds us that the true strength of this great nation lies not in the loudness of our threats, but in the quiet, unflinching dedication of our citizens. It lies in the scientists who ignored the failures and redesigned the circuit board one more time. It lies in the pilots who perfected the impasse, BLE, mid-air catch, and it lies in the leadership that had the faith to pursue truth over paranoia. When we look up at the night sky today, we should remember the silence, the fear, and the impossible challenge that one generation faced. We should remember that we, together, engineered a solution so audacious, so brilliant, that it stared down the threat of nuclear war and offered the simple, profound gift of clarity. It is a glorious story, not of bombs, but of brains, not of aggression, but of resilience. It is the story of how our nation, driven by the collective spirit of ingenuity and a profound love of peace, placed an eye in the heavens to save the world, securing the future that we lie. They in today. Let the weight of that history inspire us, always, to seek the truth, no matter how high the cost or how dark the path.